On this episode of Great American Gardens, we visit an historic Massachusetts estate with trees that hold secrets. A garden in Oregon brimming with water plants. And who's watching whom at the Jungle Garden in Louisiana? It's all coming up on Great American Gardens. Welcome to Great American Gardens. I'm Tricia Springer. Our first garden was once a secret hideaway. It was a place where owner Captain Joseph Peabody could safeguard his belongings during the War of 1812. But this garden, just north of Boston, hides nothing from view today. Glen Magna Farms is a grand garden with elegant columns, a gazebo, statues, and fountains. Pieces of the past are everywhere at the Glen Magna Farms in Massachusetts. Located in the quaint town of Danvers, just 20 miles north of Boston, history echoes down every path of this antique estate.
It's a series of garden compartments created over 144 years and represent many different gardening styles that were popular from 1817 all the way up until 1958.
Here, 4 generations of the same family have left individual imprints on the garden. A charming gazebo reveals a father's indulgence for his son's architectural interests. A 100-year-old grove of trees create a secret room. And a charming garden house was transplanted here from a famous American's home. This 11-acre historic farm is more than a compilation of lovely architecture and tidy gardens. It's the living legacy of the families who called Glen Magna Farms their summer home for 144 years, a legacy which is open to the public today. Wealthy sea captain and spice merchant Joseph Peabody first rented the property in 1812 as a safe place to store his valuables from the British during the War of 1812. In 1814, once the threat of war was over, Peabody decided he liked the farm so much that he purchased it and hired a Dutch gardener to turn the farmland into a formal garden. Nearly 200 years later, garden beds still stretch straight as an arrow behind the house. Statues and bay laurel topiaries complement a gazebo with an onion-shaped dome. This is a replica of a gazebo one of Peabody's sons designed in 1840. Francis Peabody was inspired by the round domes he saw during a visit to St. Petersburg, Russia. The personal touches in this garden continued as the farm was handed down through the generations. This lush flower garden, designed by the family in 1896, still bursts with vibrant color. Lovely balloon flowers, coral bells, and forget-me-nots bow gracefully in the breeze. Another unforgettable feature, planted more than 100 years ago, is a weeping beech tree.
I'm standing in front of a magnificent weeping beech tree. It's actually a cluster of 5 trees, and it holds a hidden secret beneath it.
Through an archway cut into the tree, visitors can walk beneath a giant umbrella created by the tree's branches. Over the years, additional trees were created when gardeners pushed living branches beneath the soil. They rooted and became new trees. However, the new trees needed support.
And here you can see the surprise that I've talked about, where the branches have been connected, they've actually been grafted and act as living cables to support the tree until it had a sufficient root system to support itself.
Another more conventional support system is this enchanting pergola with its cascading wisteria. First built in 1899, the pergola was made of cedar posts. But in 1930, the posts were replaced with 10 marble columns. Another stately feature of the garden is perhaps its most historically important. Built in 1794, this tea house was once part of the estate of a famous American merchant, Elias Haskett Derby.
The Derby Summer House was built for Elias Haskett Derby, and he was America's first millionaire, making all his money in China and East India trade. The building was constructed at his country home, about 6 miles from here, and William Endicott Sr. remembered playing in the structure as a child, and it was his lifelong dream to purchase it and move it here.
The charming house was moved to the Glen Magna estate in 1901. To walk through Glen Magna is to touch history. What started as a hideout from the British became a beloved family farm, passed from generation to generation. Today, it's a place where beauty and history walk hand in hand. When we continue, water is the chief ingredient in this Oregon garden, and it comes from a surprising place. Next on Great American Gardens. Are you like me? Welcome back to Great American Gardens. In the mid-1800s, the Oregon Trail was a grueling route pioneers traveled to settle in the West. Many who made the 2,000-mile journey homesteaded in the fertile Willamette Valley of western Oregon. Back then, the attraction of the valley was that it was a place where you could grow just about anything. That claim remains true today at Oregon Garden in Silverton. Oregon pioneers had a saying, "Plant a nail, it'll come up green." More than a century and a half after wagon trains rolled west, the state still prides itself on its lush greenery. So much so that a group representing 1,200 of the state's nurseries decided to create a garden to show off Oregon's spectacular plants and flowers.
The Oregon Association of Nurserymen were seeking to establish a botanical display garden that could showcase the fruits of their labors, and that the Oregon Garden thus became that garden after a 50-plus year dream.
Located just 40 miles south of Portland in Silverton, the Oregon Garden turns the mundane into the marvelous. A wetland that recycles wastewater back into the ground. A water garden decorated with delicate lilies and sturdy dinosaur plants. And a flower garden that's more than it first appears. The Oregon Garden is easy for the whole family to enjoy because it offers 20-minute electric tram rides around the garden.
Most people are just awestruck by what they have seen here at the garden, and that many people will say, "I'm coming back and bringing my friends, I'm bringing my mom, I'm bringing my dad."
The 60-acre garden opened in 2001 and currently features 17 separate gardens. Plans call for the garden to grow to 4 times the size, 240 acres. One of the reasons the garden on this former Arabian horse farm can expand easily is because it has a ready supply of water, a key ingredient which came about in an unorthodox manner. In the mid-1990s, when the Oregon Association of Nurserymen was trying to find a place to plant the garden, the city of Silverton was looking for a place to put its recycled wastewater.
The city manager of Silverton read an ad or saw an article in a paper and contacted the Oregon Association of Nurserymen saying, "We have ample water and we need to find a site that we can pour up to 1 million gallons a day of water onto. You want to have a botanical display garden. How about we get together and see what arises?"
What arose was something beyond what either the city or the nurserymen had envisioned. Today, visitors get to see a unique part of the ecosystem, while plants perform the final step in the water purification process. Cattails, bright green duckweed, and water fern all feast on the byproducts remaining in the water. As the plants grow, the water is cleansed within the 17-acre wetlands. Water is used in creative ways yet again in what's called the Amazing Water Garden.
The Amazing Water Garden is unique in that it is a water wall and freshwater feature just below the wetlands. And it looks like it's continuation of the wetlands, and it features a lot of Japanese irises and lotuses and water lilies and other water-loving plants.
Families strolling along the crisscrossing paths of the Amazing Water Garden also see dramatic plants like Japanese bloodgrass and giant rhubarb, also known as the dinosaur plant. The leaves of this plant die when winter hits, but the roots stay alive. It rejuvenates in the spring and can grow up to 6 feet across. Just beyond the Amazing Water Garden is a garden that amazes on a different level. On first blush, the petal garden appears to be a series of oblong flower beds filled with salvia, dusty miller, amaranth, and petunias. But a bird's eye view gives the garden new meaning. Shaped like a giant flower, each flower bed forms a petal, and the fountain forms the center. Flowers form the backdrop of the garden green. Here, waves of flowers frame an enormous lawn. Gay feathers, gaura, and roses blend to create a tapestry of color. And like a fine weaving, a closer look reveals hidden intricacy.
This is a rugosa rose hybrid called Wild Spice, and that as the flower matures and the petals fall away, you'll start to have a green fruit underneath it. And then once that matures, you'll start to have an orangey, fleshy material, and that is your rose hip. And that's where your seed are, and you can actually take the pulp and produce vitamin C from this.
Whether you look closely or view it from afar, the Oregon Garden is a unique collection of habitats and horticulture. There's more than meets the eye here. Both beautiful and practical, the garden is a flourishing, living example of how water can be used and reused. In true pioneering spirit, the Oregon Garden makes the most of what the land has to offer. Coming up on Great American Gardens, birds of a feather flock together at the Jungle Gardens in Louisiana when we return. Welcome back. I'm Tricia Springer. If our next garden has a motto, this is it. Expect the unexpected. We're going to Avery Island, Louisiana, where there's much to see, but those who visit often discover they are being watched as well. Jungle Gardens is full of surprises. Whether it's the bulging eyes of alligators spying on tourists, the thousands of snowy egrets nesting upon man-made piers, or a hidden Buddha overlooking a jade green pond. Jungle Gardens on Louisiana's Avery Island bursts with character and intrigue. Avery Island sits in the middle of marshland near the Gulf of Mexico. 120 miles west of New Orleans, Avery Island is perhaps best known as the place where McElhaney Company Tabasco sauce is produced. The son of the Tabasco Company founder took some of the money earned from the sales of the hot sauce to create a wildlife preserve and public garden on the island.
The gardens were a brainchild or a really lifetime work of my grandfather, E.A. McElhaney. As a young man, he grew up here, he lived in the marshes, he knew birds, he knew wildlife, and very observant.
Edward McElhaney, also known as E.A. McElhaney, was a naturalist who traveled the world bringing exotic plants back to his 200-acre garden on Avery Island. But more significantly, he helped bring the snowy egret back from the brink of extinction. During the late 1800s, the bird's beautiful plume became a fashion statement.
The nuptial plumes were very much desired for women's hats, and they were killed for that purpose. He saw the decline in the bird population and started the gardens with the Bird City Sanctuary.
Worried that the birds would disappear, Edward captured 8 birds from the wild and raised them in cages on the island. He released them in the fall so they could migrate to South America. To his delight, the snowy egrets returned to the island the following spring, bringing others with them. So many egrets flocked to Jungle Gardens that Edward named the pond Bird City and built piers for the birds to nest.
The colony many years ago outgrew the carrying capacity for a large group of nesting birds to handle. So E.A. McElhaney conceived this idea of building racks for the birds, and they liked those quite as well.
But birds are only part of the attraction of Jungle Gardens. As the sign suggests, there are other things worth keeping an eye out for. Alligators bob up and down in the swampy water looking for a tasty snack. Once endangered themselves, alligators are a frequent sight here now.
I think the state's done a great job of alligator protection. We now have the farm raising of alligators where eggs are taken from the wild and raised in captivity, and a percentage are returned to the wild. So we have lots and lots and lots of alligators. These days, an 8-foot alligator is a big one. You used to get up to 12 feet. An 8 to 10-foot alligator is a big alligator.
Less ominous, but impressive in their own right, are the massive live oak trees that line the 4-mile road through the gardens. Draped with long strands of moody Spanish moss, they present a classic Louisiana vision. Spanish moss is a bromeliad, which means it's an air plant that does not have roots. It collects the water it needs from rainfall and gathers its nutrients from dust particles. Spanish moss was once used to stuff automobile seats, mattresses, and furniture. While the Spanish moss adds an air of mystery to the garden, this wisteria arch adds a touch of romance. Covered with wisteria vines, the 180-foot-long metal passage becomes a tunnel of perfume when the wisteria bloom in the spring. But perhaps the most exotic spot on the tour is the Buddha's temple. Sitting on a small hill surrounded by brilliant green duckweed, this Chinese Buddha seems out of place in a Louisiana swamp. It was given to Edward McElhaney in 1936. While the teakwood statue now sits serenely on a lotus, its past is anything but serene.
They found this Buddha in a New York warehouse. And what I've been told is that it had been looted out of a temple in China by rival Chinese warlords and sent to the U.S. to sell to raise money for whatever cause they were pursuing. They bought it at auction for warehouse charges and sent it down to E.A. McElhaney as the cornerstone of the Chinese garden.
Today, the Buddha adds a calming influence over the untamed swamp. As its name suggests, Jungle Gardens is an eclectic mix. Part jungle, part garden. It's a wild kingdom with a temple fit for a king. Here, nature rules the roost. And the legacy of a pioneering conservationist is preserved. When we come back, we'll revisit a very young garden with some very old trees. We'll see a 400-year-old oak tree at the Oregon Garden when Great American Gardens continues. Welcome back to Great American Gardens. The Oregon Garden is the youngest public garden we visited today. It opened its doors in 2001. But while it's just getting off the ground, some things in the garden have been in the ground for a very long time.
This is the signature oak tree. It's an Oregon white oak. It's 400 years old, and it stands 100 feet tall and has a circumference of 23 feet.
This ancient tree is part of a 25-acre white oak grove. The average age of the trees here is between 150 and 200 years old. The tree is covered with lichen, which is why it has a grayish color. The oak tree is one of the largest white oaks in the Willamette Valley and was designated a heritage tree by the county. Thank you for joining us on our tour of Great American Gardens. And remember, public gardens are your gardens.